Shabbat Shalom. Hello, Barbara. Shabbat Shalom, everybody out there in TV land. So good to have you with us this morning from wherever you are. It is sort of a gray and damp Shabbat morning, so I hope you are cuddled up somewhere warm, maybe with somebody that you love, to have a chance to welcome Shabbat and to carve out a little bit of time in this weekend for prayer and reflection, for music and study, and we are glad to be doing it with you. This morning, we are going to start, as we do each week, with Matovu. That is on page 74 of our prayer books. It's a prayer that recognizes, acknowledges, appreciates the preciousness of the places that we call home. How goodly are your tents, it says. So maybe this is a time for you to appreciate wherever you are that's keeping you safe and warm and dry on this Shabbat morning. Page 74, Matovu. We'll continue with the blessing, giving thanks for our bodies this morning, expressing our gratitude for the miraculous gifts of those bodies when they do the things that we ask them to, and even when our bodies are a bit stubborn and don't do the things that we hope that they would. It is still a reminder that our bodies are gifts from God, and so we give God our thanks for these miraculous vessels that we move around the world in. Page 77. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe. With divine wisdom you have made our bodies, combining veins, arteries, and vital organs into a finely balanced network. Wondrous maker and sustainer of life, were one of them to fail, how well we are aware we would lack the strength to stand before you. Blessed are you, Adonai, source of our health and strength. Baruch atah Adonai, rofei chol basar umafli la'asot.
אתה בראת, אתה יצרת, אתה נפחת בי, ואתה משמרה בקרבי. Elohai, Elohai, neshama, shenatata bi Jehovah hi.
On the even-numbered pages, starting on page 80, we'll continue with the Nisim B'chol Yom, the blessings we offer for the miracles we enjoy every day. Barbara and I will take turns offering these blessings that start on the top of page 80. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who has given the mind the ability to distinguish day from night.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who opens the eyes of the blind.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who frees the captive.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who lifts up the fallen.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who stretches the earth over the waters.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who strengthens our steps.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who clothes the naked.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who gives strength to the weary.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who removes sleep from the eyes, slumber from the eyelids.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who made me in the image of God.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who has made me free.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who has made me a Jew.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who girds Israel with strength.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who crowns Israel with splendor.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
On page 88, these are things that are limitless, of which a person enjoys the fruit of the world while the principle remains in the world to come. They are honoring one's father and mother, engaging in deeds of compassion, arriving early for study morning and evening, dealing graciously with guests, visiting the sick, providing for the wedding couple, accompanying the dead for burial, being devoted in prayer, and making peace among people. But the study of Torah encompasses them all. On page 100, the 150th Psalm, Hallelujah.
Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Bekosho. Hallelujah. Bekiauso. Hallelujah. Bekorata. Hallelujah. The Lord, hallelujah. 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 Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. The take a shofar, hallelujah. The never before, hallelujah. Hallelujah, b'tzitz l'shama. Hallelujah, b'tzitz l'Torah. Kol hanshama. Tehallelujah, tehallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah.
Chatzi Kaddish is on page 106.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, ועמד יברח חירותי וימליך מלכותי, בחייכון וביומכון, ובחיי לכל בית ישראל. בעגלה, בעגלה, ומזמן קריב, ויאמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מבורך, לעולם עולם ועלמיה, יתברך, יתברך וישתבח, ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל, שמי דקודשה ברכו לעילם מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, ימירן מעלמה, ויאמרו Amen. We rise for the Baruch Hu. Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Adonai HaMorach le'olam va'ed. Baruch Adonai HaMorach le'olam va'ed. Praise be the one to whom praise is due. Praise be to God, praise to you. Praise be the one to whom praise is due. Praise be to God, praise to you. Baruch Adonai HaMorach le'olam va'ed. Baruch Adonai HaMorach le'olam va'ed.
Continuing now on page 110 of our prayer books. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, yotzer or uvorei choshech, osei shalom uvorei et hakol, hameir la'aretz v'ladarim aleha barachamim, uftuvo mechadesh b'chol yom tamid ma'aseh v'reishit, ma rabu ma'asecha Adonai, kulam b'chochma asita, mal'ah ha'aretz kinyanecha, titbarach Adonai Eloheinu, al shevach ma'aseh yadecha, ve'al me'orei or she'asita yifa'arucha selah, Or Chadash al Tzion Ta'ir, v'nizkei chulanu mehera le'oro, Baruch atah Adonai, Yotzer HaMeorot. Love your neighbor as yourself, you said, and light-blinded we saw that inner and outer worlds are one as you are one. You spoke and we wrote. We reached for you down the centuries, your light moving before us, as we climbed, fell back, and climbed again, your Sinai of life. Baruch atah Adonai, Habocher be'amo Yisrael, be'ahava.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Please be seated. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבבך, ושיננתם לבניך, ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם.
This reading on page 119. Life without integrity is like loosely hanging threads, easily fraying from the main cloth. While in acts of piety we learn to understand that every instant is like a thread raveling out of eternity to form a delicate tassel. We must not cast off the threads, but weave them into the design of an eternal fabric. Each day points to eternity. The fate of all time depends upon a single moment. Micha Mocha is on page 122. Our Amidah begins on page 124 of our prayer books. We rise to prayer together.
Adonai sefatai tiftach ufi agim tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei Avoteinu v'Imotenu Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor v'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, V'Konei Hakol, וזוכר חסדי אבות ואימהות, ומביא גאולה לבני בניהם, למען שמו באהבה. מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן, ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם ועזרת שרה. אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, בחיי הכל אתה רב להושיע, מוריד הטל, מכלכל חיים בחסד, מחיי הכל ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר. מי כמוך בעל גבורות ומידו מלך, מלך ממית ומחיה ומצמיח ישועה, ונאמן אתה להחיות הכל. ברוך אתה אדוני מחיי הכל. נקדש את שמך בעולם, כשם שמקדישים אותו בשמי מרום, ככתוב על יד נביאך, וקרא זה אל זה ואמר, קדוש 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 אדוני צבאות, מלוא כל הארץ כבודו. אדיר אדירנו אדוני אדוננו מאדיר שמך בכל הארץ. ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו. אחד הוא אלוהינו, הוא אבינו מלכנו, הוא מושיענו והוא ישמיענו, ברחמיו לעיני כל חי. אני אדוני אלוהיך, ימלוך אדוני לעולם. אלוהיך ציון לדור ודור. הללויה. לדור ודור נגידון לך, ולנצח נצחים קדושתך נקדיש, ושבחך אלוהינו מפינו לא ימוש לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש.
You may be seated. We're going to make a little bit of time now for us to continue individually, for us to just spend some time with our own thoughts and prayers, a little bit of time carved out for quiet reflection for us to offer our own meditations and prayer. We continue quietly and individually.
Ose shalom bimroma, Uyase shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol yoshvei tevel, ve'imru.
We'll continue with a moment of Torah for this morning. This is were we in person, the time when we would pull out the Torah scroll and get ready to hear the verses read from its parchment. But instead, this is the time when I'm going to pull out the Torah on my screen and give us a chance to hear some words written on the on our various electronic screens. So as I do, Barbara's going to give us a little bit of music for this transition to our Torah learning this morning.
Adonai Eloheinu ve'ishtachavu behar kodsho. Romemhu Adonai Eloheinu ve'ishtachavu behar kodsho.
All right, thank you. So this morning we are in Shabbat Emor, reading from the portion of the book of Leviticus called Emor, coming from the very beginning of the portion this week. This is a section of Leviticus in which God is giving instructions to the priests about how they're to prepare themselves to offer the sacrifices in the wilderness tabernacle. And today we're going to be reading a few verses from the beginning of Leviticus 21 that we'll be studying in some more detail with some more contemporary ramifications a bit later. And the parsha reads like this. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe. I can't see it. Hang on a second. Oops, sorry. There we go. Emor el hakohanim b'nei Aharon ve'amarta alehem lenefesh lo yitama be'amav ki im lish ero hakarov elav le'imo ula'aviv v'livno ulvito ul'achiv לאחותו הבתולה הקרובה אליו אשר לא הייתה לאיש לה יטמא. לא יטמא בעל בעמיו להיכלו. And God said to Moses, speak to the priests, the son of Aaron, and say to them, none shall defile himself for the dead among his kin, except for the relatives that are closest to him, his mother, his father, his son, his daughter, and his brother. Also for a sister who has remained close to him because she has not married, for her he may defile himself, but he shall not defile himself for a relative by marriage and thereby profane himself. So in a moment we're going to come back to those verses and explore what those might have to do with the world that we're in today. But before we do, we're going to take a second to turn from the verses of Torah to offer Mishaberach, a prayer for healing, as we'll turn our thoughts to the members of our community, maybe the members of our own family, or even ourselves, who on this Shabbat morning are in need of God's presence as we make our way from illness and difficulty to wholeness and healing. We'll pray the Mishaberach that's on page 253 of our books.
Mikor Abraha Leimotenu. May the source of strength who bless the ones before us help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Amen. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say Amen. And let us say
A few announcements before we get into our learning together. Tonight at 7 o'clock is the last of this year's series of Havdalah for All services. It's been a great way for us to connect with each other and to say goodbye to Shabbat on Saturday nights. But tonight is the last one, and so I want to invite you to make a special effort to join Barbara and to join Cantor Simmons tonight at 7 o'clock on Zoom for our last Havdalah for All. You can register for Havdalah by going to our website, and thanks to everyone who has been with us for those Havdalah services during this year. I know it's been a great source of joy and connection as we've tried to figure out what Shabbat means and what community means during this very strange year. This coming Thursday the 4th at 7 p.m., we will be hosting Israeli Arab journalist Khaled Abu Tuameh to talk about the upcoming Palestinian elections. There's sort of a wry joke that is making its way around Israel these days that the Palestinians haven't had an election for 15 years and the Israelis seem to be having them every 3 months. So Khaled is going to talk to us a little bit about the sort of ironic truth of that fact and reflect a little bit about what we can expect from the Palestinian elections and what the results of those elections may mean for the future of the Middle East. So we'll ask you to register ahead of time for the conversation with Khaled that will take place on Zoom. Please go to our website to find out how to join us for that conversation. Lastly, yet another reminder that we have moved into phase 4 of our reopening plan, which means that there are plenty of opportunities for you to join us in person for programming and worship. Just make a point of registering in advance so we know to expect you for services, for programs, and keep your eyes on the website, the bulletin, and other communications from Emmanuel to see how and when you can join us in person. All right, so as promised, we're going to take a look at these verses from the Torah portion this week, and I'm going to pop that back up on the screen so we can take a look at them once more. So as I said in the introduction a moment ago, the verses from Torah this week open with this set of instructions to the priests about how they are to comport themselves in order to be in proper condition to offer sacrifices. These verses that we looked at today refer specifically to the care that the priests need to take about not getting too close to dead bodies. The presence of a dead body can transmit a certain kind of ritual impurity, which in the days of the sacrifices would render a priest ineligible to bring a sacrifice. If he had touched or gotten too close to a dead body, he would have to purify himself ritually before he could come back and resume his duties of offering the sacrifices. So the priests know that they can't get too close to corpses or cemeteries, graveyards, places where dead bodies are preserved or buried if they're to keep their jobs as priests. These verses offer a few exceptions to that rule, that they say that priests are allowed to get close to the dead bodies of those who are closest to them. Their parents, their children, their siblings. Those are exceptions to the rules, and the Torah wants to make sure that the strict rules about priests' behavior doesn't lead them to believe erroneously that they need to isolate themselves and separate themselves dramatically from the people that they love. We want to be able to let them mourn the people that are closest to them when they die. So that's the background that we're going to enter into our study with this morning. So in a second, we're going to talk a little bit about the presence of death and the precautions that we need to take when we are around dead bodies and around cemeteries. This week, the realities of life in Israel have made us take a new look at these rules about death and peril and danger. As you may know, just a couple of days ago, Israel suffered what I believe is now characterized as its worst single-day loss of civilian life in its history during the tragic accident at Har Meron, at Mount Meron, where tens of thousands, even upwards of 100,000 worshipers and pilgrims made their way to the burial site of a second-century rabbi, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. It is traditional for pilgrims to come visit his burial site on Lag BaOmer, which was just a couple of days ago, to pay their respects, to say prayers, to sing, and to ask for his blessing from beyond the grave. This week, the crowds around that gravesite were so overwhelming and the conditions so unsafe that they led to a terrible accident in which dozens of people lost their lives. So we're going to study a little bit about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, one particular story about him, to connect the story that we read in the Torah portion this week with the events that happened at Mount Meron. So we're going to read this story here about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai that appears in the Babylonian Talmud. Now, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, like all rabbis of the second century of his day, knew the rules about not getting too close to a dead body, not defiling oneself through the presence of a corpse that we read in our portion. And according to legends, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, when he was running from the Roman Empire, who sought to capture and execute him, he took refuge in a cave for years and hid there, according to legend, for years after years to escape the Roman authorities who were trying to execute him. And while he was there, according to legend again, God miraculously provided the presence of a carob tree that would feed him and a spring of water from which he could drink. And those were the things that kept him alive for years while hiding in the cave. Again, according to the story, after Rabbi Shimon makes his way out of the cave, he says to himself, here's the text that's in front of us, "An appreciation of the miracle that has been done for me, I should go and fix something. Is there something that needs repair?" They said to him, that is the circle of rabbis that greeted him after he came out of the cave, they said to him, there's a place where there is a doubt about impurity, and the priests are unable to go there. We're going to pause here for a second to explain what that means. When there is doubt or uncertainty about whether a place has seen the presence of a corpse, out of an abundance of caution, priests are unable to go to a place where there is some uncertainty about whether a corpse has been. Just to be on the safe side, priests don't go anywhere where there may have been the presence of a corpse. And so in this particular story, there's a certain place where priests otherwise would have needed to go, but they weren't sure whether it was a pure place or an impure place, a place that had been rendered impure by a dead body. And so out of an abundance of caution, the priests stay away. So they said, this is something that needs repair. This issue, this uncertainty needs resolution. So Rabbi Shimon says, this is something I can fix. Here we are in the fourth line of this passage. Rabbi Shimon went to that place, and he made basically an arbitrary decision. He said, everywhere that the soil is hard, we're going to decide that that is ritually pure. Any place where the soil is soft, we'll designate as impure. So parts of this uncertain territory will be left pure, and others will be designated as impure. So the priests know which places they can and can't go. So that was the decision he made to, quote unquote, repair the uncertainty of the purity status of this section of territory. A certain elder, according to the story, scoffed at him. Huh, Ben Yochai has purified a cemetery. The remark that this guy makes is meant to be sort of an insult, because if it's true that anywhere a corpse can be found can't be made pure, he's basically making fun of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, that you can't make a cemetery pure. And he's just sort of arbitrarily decided that these places with hard soil should be pure and soft soil are impure. He's just making it up. And you might as well assume that he's designating a cemetery that's full of dead bodies as a place that's ritually pure. So Rabbi Shimon responds to him with, if we know his story, with uncharacteristic kindness. Rabbi Shimon responds to him, even prostitutes apply makeup to each other. Even prostitutes who are, let's say, at the bottom rung of the social ladder, who aren't expected to have any codes of ethics or morality, even they can muster enough common decency to look after each other and help each other with their makeup, even though they're at the bottom of the society's ladder, and even though, frankly, they're competitors of each other, they can still offer a little bit of basic decency to help them make sure that their clothes are on straight and their makeup looks nice. Isn't it appropriate for Torah scholars to be kind to one another? Look, he says, you can disagree with me. You might not like my ruling. You might think I drew the lines in the wrong way, but for God's sake, we're both in the same business. We're both Jews. We're both Torah scholars. Can't we at least muster up a little bit of common decency to be kind and forgiving of each other? So this is the story one of the stories about Shimon bar Yochai, that although in other parts of his story he was known to be quite a stringent religious zealot, in this story he comes out with a lesson for his followers, that to be a follower of Torah means that the most important value is kindness, even to supersede one of the laws potentially that we read just above in this passage from Leviticus, that the rules about ritual purity and impurity aren't so sacred that we should sacrifice kindness and decency in order to uphold them. That, yeah, the rules, the lines I drew may have been arbitrary, but the highest value is kindness and collegiality. It's not stringent adherence to the laws. I want to look now at a passage of an interview that came out in the Israeli news this week. After the loss of life at Har Meron, at the grave of Shimon bar Yochai, the journalist interviewed someone who was there and heard the sounds of the sirens going off at a time of real panic and uncertainty about what was happening. So this guy says to the interviewer, "We thought maybe there was a bomb alert over a suspicious package. When you see a suspicious package in Israel, you should be on alert and be concerned that maybe it contains a bomb." So he heard the sirens going off, and he thought that maybe that's what it meant. He continued, "No one imagined that this could happen here. Rejoicing became mourning. A great light became a deep darkness," a pilgrim who gave his name as Yitzchak told Channel 12 TV. Rabbi Shimon used to say that he could absolve the world. If he didn't manage to cancel this edict on the very day of his exaltation, then we need to do real soul searching. So this pilgrim, this visitor to the grave, remembers Rabbi Shimon's legacy as one of healing and repair, of absolution of the world's sin and suffering. And it ends with this sort of real mournful note of self-scrutiny. That at a time when we're supposed to be remembering this great sage who embodies kindness and forbearance, that on that day of all the days there should be this terrible loss of life and terrible suffering, it should call us to self-scrutiny and soul-searching. We're going to end with one last piece of text. It comes from a collection called Bnei Yisachar, to be read during this season of the year. One particular practice on the day of Lag BaOmer is unique. Children go to parks and fields to play with bows and arrows. You may have heard that bows and arrows are a part of a custom of Lag BaOmer. What's the reason for this peculiar custom? Well, here's the reason, Bnei Yisachar says. One well-known explanation has to do with the fact that during Rabbi Shimon's lifetime, no rainbow ever appeared in the sky. I have a weird story about his biography, that during his whole life there were no rainbows. Why? Well, this is significant because you might remember the story from the book of Genesis. Genesis relates that the rainbow represents God's covenant, never to destroy the world again, even if the human race would degenerate to its status prior to the flood. Remember that story from Genesis, that the sign of the rainbow in the sky is a sign of the covenant between God and humanity. And God's willing to withhold God's wrath from the world, no matter how bad we behave. But as long as Rabbi Shimon was alive, the text continues, his merit and piety alone were enough to ensure that God would not regret the divine creation, with no need for the rainbow. On the day of Rabbi Shimon's passing, however, the world was in need of the rainbow. Thus, each year on that day, we recall this man's greatness by playing with the bow. So the teaching suggests that when Rabbi Shimon was alive, his presence on the world, on the earth, put such gentleness and kindness, merit and piety into the world that he alone was able to save the world from suffering and destruction. But in his absence, there is suffering. As we've seen every day around us, there is suffering, there is pain, there is real loss and mourning in the world. And so in order to compensate for the world's suffering and pain, we have to do what we can to evoke God's pity by, in this example, playing with a bow that reminds God of the shape of the rainbow and of God's agreement to withhold wrath and retribution from the world. And so our job now in Rabbi Shimon's absence is to remember the things that he stood for, that he stood for the priority of kindness. He stood for the priority of gentleness and giving others the benefit of the doubt, so that even when we experience suffering in the world, we remember what's really most important. It's not a slavish adherence to the law, to focus only on obedience and to sacrifice kindness and human relations in its stead. And so the best way to honor his memory is to honor the thing that he stood for, which is, even when tragedy and suffering surrounds us, to prioritize the care of our fellow human being and to prioritize the kindness and compassion that we are to show to our fellow Jews and to our fellow humans everywhere. So let's hope that in the wake of this tragedy and in the memory of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, we can continue to put patience and compassion and kindness into the world. And so thinking of those we have lost this week in particular, just on the heels of this terrible tragedy in Israel, we think as well of all of those we have lost at this season, in earlier years, or perhaps in very recent times gone by. We take just a moment to prepare for Kaddish, to do that work of memory, to turn our thoughts to those who have departed the earth, our own loved ones and those whom our friends and neighbors have lost, the martyrs of our people whose graves are unmarked, and those of every race and nation whose lives have been a blessing to humanity. As we remember them, we meditate on the meaning of love and loss, of life and death. Let's take just a quiet moment now to remember. We think now of our loved ones whom death has recently taken from us, those who died at this season in years past, and those whom we have drawn into our hearts with our own. On this Shabbat, our hearts go out in sadness and sympathy to the families of Marvin Spear and Trina Underwood, who died recently. We send our thoughts and compassion to those who love them. And so as we remember those we have lost, we turn together to page 294 and we rise for the recitation of Kaddish. Page 294. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, ve'almad divrach cherutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon u'vyomechon, u'chay decho beit Yisrael, ba'agala u'bizman kariv v'imru amen. Yeheh shmei Rabbah mevarach le'elam l'olmei almaya, יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה בריחו לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דאמירן בעלמא ואמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן.
עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו Amen.
We will continue now with blessings of Kiddush and Motzi before we conclude.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen.
Amen. L'chaim.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Amen.
Amen. B'te'avon. I hope everyone's going to have a yummy Shabbos breakfast or brunch this morning. And as we head out of this prayerful space together and we move toward the rest of our day of rest, I hope that it is a day of kindness and compassion, of gentleness and love, spent with those you love, doing the things that you love, and that it's a restful and fulfilling day of rest. Barbara, what are we going to close with this morning?
We are going to close with Od Yavo Shalom on page 353 of the prayer book. Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu, Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu, Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu, Ve'al Kulam. Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu, Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu, Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu, Ve'al Kulam. Salam Aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam. Salam, salam, salam Aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam. Salam, salam. Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu, Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu, Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu, ve'al kulam.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.